Richard Dobbs, according to the McKinsey Global Institute Playing to Win study, it seems as though companies from advanced economies are still dominating the global economic playing field. They earn 2/3 of the global profits, so the rich apparently are still getting richer.
We've had a wonderful period for companies around the world, particularly large Western companies. They've been able to grow their profit pool 5% in real terms. That's 70% faster than GDP. They've had benefit from lower interest rates. They've had benefit from lower taxes. They've been able to expand globally and sell to global consumers around the world. It's been a wonderful 30 years. If you look at US companies, US corporate profitability as a percentage of GDP, US GDP, is at an all-time high. The only time the US in the last 100 years have ever been as profitable as this was 1929.
But we have seen a shift from heavy industry towards knowledge-based and tech companies. Can you talk about the shift and what it means going forward, too?
Increasingly, when we look in emerging markets, a lot of the low-skill, heavy manufacturing jobs and activities have moved there. And the activities that are generating the most profits in the West are the idea-intensive industries, the industries that have patents and research, as opposed to ones that are big manufacturing. Things like steel is increasingly, the profit pool in steel is increasingly in emerging markets.
But just because the developed economies are taking a lot of the profits, it doesn't mean the emerging markets are being entirely left behind. According to the study, 40% of global revenue now comes from emerging markets, especially China. People are worried about China right now, but it's still a dominant powerhouse on the global economy.
It is a dominant powerhouse, and you look at most Western companies, increasingly emerging markets are a large proportion. If you took companies like GE, 20, 30 years ago, they were largely a US company. Now they're a global company. Half of their revenue is coming from outside the US, or over half of that, and it's increasingly important. And everyone talks about China slowing down. 6% growth China still adds a Canada to the global economy every 2 years. 6% growth on a big number is still a huge amount of growth.
But according to the study, it seems as though it's going to get more competitive going forward between the developed markets and the emerging markets. So what do companies have to do to stay relevant?
Well, first of all, they've got to understand the new competitive threat. The competitive threat is going to come from emerging market companies. The Western company is increasingly going to see emerging market competitors. So they've got to understand those companies. They've also got to understand the threat that comes from home. Tech companies and tech-enabled companies are increasingly stepping out into other industries. We see how tech companies are competing in media, and we're going to see increasingly how companies like Amazon, a tech-enabled company, competes in other industry segments and start competing there, disrupting there. And the third force is actually the small and medium-sized enterprise is now going to be a much more viable source of competitors because of the rise of platforms. So a small and medium-sized enterprise can sell on Amazon Marketplace and can compete with a large company. An individual person can sell their spare room through Airbnb. A driver can compete through Uber. So we're increasingly seeing marketplaces allowing the small and medium-sized enterprises and the individuals to compete with the large corporations. So what the large corporation in the West has to do is understand their new threats, the threats that come from emerging markets, from tech companies, and also from tech-enabled small companies that are able to compete through marketplaces.
And what does this mean for employment? Should people who don't have higher skills or advanced degrees, how worried should they be?
I think that in some ways this is a good news aspect for them. Some of these individuals are able to now compete by selling in through marketplaces. Think about the person who actually wants to have a flexible job who becomes an Uber driver. It's actually quite good news. Before, it was quite hard to do that because you had to do qualifications, you had to think about medallions. So in some ways, there's a good news story in that as we see some of these marketplaces for labor, small individuals who are particularly in the less skilled end of the market are able to compete.
All right, and then finally, so what do you plan to do with this survey? How can the CEOs you talk to use it to benefit their organizations the most?
Well, first of all, they've got to understand the competitive threat and be paranoid about this. Too many executives have spent too much time understanding about how to cut costs and grow their business. They haven't understood the new competitive threat and what it needs to take. So the first element is executives need to spend time understanding the threat. And then the second component is company executives need to understand how to disrupt their own business before someone else comes and disrupts it. Too many executives say, I don't want to launch this new product or this new channel because it will cannibalize my existing business. So what they don't do is they don't launch it. Someone then comes along and eats the business instead. So businesses need to be prepared to disrupt themselves by establishing competing units that maybe are internal disruption units and being prepared to do that.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot for coming on, talking about it. And thank you for watching The Street.